Welcome back to Balmer's Workshop. Thanks so much for joining me here again. It is always nice to have you back. This time we'll be finalizing the rear swing-away bumper build for this classic Ford van. In our last episode, part 3, we finished up by welding up the swing arm mount into the bumper, and we'll start this episode by having a little bit of a more in-depth look at how that mount was created, and then we'll move on, of course, to the swing arm build itself and the final details. So right now I'm creating the support that will actually house the tail end of the swing arm spindle. This is going to be welded into the bumper against the bumper bracket as well as the receiver on that side, and then it's also going to be gusseted for extra strength. So right now I'm cutting out the relief that will allow me to slide the brace underneath the receiver, as you'll see in a moment. And now I am cutting the hole for the spindle itself. That's a 1.5 inch hole, cutting it top and bottom, of course. And then we'll move back over to the bench and test fit it. It's a nice fit. I was very satisfied with that. Tight fit all around. So time to make that gusset, and we'll start by making a plastic mock-up of the gusset just to save time and potentially save material in case of mistakes. And there you are. It fits well around the receiver and up against the bracket, and now I'm cutting it out to fit against the spindle itself. And I believe this will be the final adjustment. And there you are. The spindle fits in nicely. So now I'll go ahead and cap the support that I made so that no water will get inside of there and cause rust over time. And then we can get that tack welded into the bumper, and we'll also add that, or we'll create that gusset rather, and add that in as well. I should mention also that the spindle is situated at exactly 90 degrees to the bumper. The swing arm itself will have a little bit of an angle on it, and that's to compensate for the weight that will be added to the swing arm. But the spindle itself is at a true 90 degrees to the bumper, and the reason for that is so that when the swing arm is opened, we ensure that it stays completely flat throughout its trajectory or throughout its arc. It doesn't have a tendency to fall to one side or the other, and it opens nice and predictably and smoothly. A huge thank you to all my recent subscribers and everybody who has been liking and commenting. I've had some great comments recently, and I hope that my feedback has been helpful. I've also had some emails from customers or from viewers rather, and some of those viewers have even turned into customers. If you've checked out my Suzuki Sidekick front bumper video, I have sold a couple of bracket sets to people who are building their own bumpers according to my design, so that's a really exciting thing. I'm super glad that people are getting some great information out of this, and they're able to use some of my parts to make their builds just that much easier and that much more precise. So definitely a one hand washes the other kind of a situation. So thanks so much again. All right, so it is the next day, and we're nearing completion with the bumper. I had some camera issues with my time-lapse camera. I can no longer charge it, and therefore I can't get the footage off of it, so I'm going to have to take that in and hopefully get the footage, because there's a lot of stuff on there that I really want you guys to see, and hopefully you have seen that, and hopefully that means that I have been able to recover that info. But anyway, it posed a real issue for me yesterday, and I didn't get really any footage of the swing arm build, so I apologize for that. But we'll go over it a little bit. It's reasonably straightforward. Basically, I figured out where my angle rather started in the bumper. I knew that I had 48 inches between my angles, and then based on those measurements, I was able to cut my pieces for my swing arm. So basically, I went from again the point at which I created an angle, went straight back from that to here. From this point to the very inside of the swing arm hub was, I believe, 9 inches or something like that. Anyway, point being, I cut my piece a little longer, of course, so that I had room to come over the edge. I gave myself about an extra 1/2 inch. I'm using a draw latch on this particular bumper, and the draw latch itself needs to sit just a little bit higher than the catch, but it can't sit very much higher, so that's why we've got a swing arm that isn't perfectly level. If you look, it's a little lower on the driver's side than it is on the passenger side, but that is just fine. And I've got my spare tire flange made up, obviously. There's the the portion that holds the spare tire, and you can see it's well gusseted. We'll pull all this apart shortly, and we're going to weld up the swing arm, and we're going to sand out a little spot that I forgot to sand out over here. I need to go along this line here so that we're not so close to the edge of the truck. But we're virtually there. I'm going to put one more brace on the swing arm as well. You'll see me do that. But yeah, almost done. The swing arm itself works quite nicely. I'll show you that. So there you go. Nice smooth opening. And it will close ever so gently on its own. Oh yeah, and I should show you. Of course, I've included both a buffer plate there for the draw latch to slide up on so it never scuffs the bumper, and also a backing plate so that it has something to stop against, because this type of a latch needs to have a tight backstop to secure it against. But there you go, it's working. I'm happy with it. I'll pull the tire off, pull the swing arm off, weld up the swing arm, and add the extra brace to it, and then we'll put it all back together and see what we've got. So the footage of the swing arm assembly was unfortunately lost, but at least I've got footage of the weld up and the blending and so forth. So I'll include as much as I have, and I will try to explain what was in the lost footage as we go through this. So I have welded my top bead on the swing away hub before anything else. I haven't done the bottom or the sides yet, and the reason is because I was hoping for the swing arm to sit just slightly higher than it was where it latches, and I'm hoping that the heat shrink here will suck that up a little bit and give me exactly the gap that I'm looking for when I put it back on the vehicle. So I'm going to let that cool, and then I'm going to put it back on the vehicle before I do the rest of the weld, see if that's worked out. If it hasn't, then I'm going to have to make an adjustment, I think. So that worked out very well. The weld that I made on the top there has cooled, and it certainly did heat shrink a little bit, and I've loaded the tire back on, and we now have, let's just pull this catch off, we now have a good 1/4 of an inch, maybe 5/16 between the latch plate and the buffer plate. So now if I latch it up, it pulls down nice and tight and solid with no effort at all, but it won't rub on the bumper over time. It's going to always have that nice bit of clearance. So fantastic. Take this thing back off and fully weld it now. So as I mentioned earlier, the spindle itself is welded into the bumper at exactly 90 degrees. However, the swing arm is not welded to the hub at exactly 90 degrees. It's going to be slightly off, and that's to compensate for the weight that's added to the swing arm, the weight of the tire, jerry can holder, whatever else you might add to it. So basically what you want to do is tack weld your swing arm to your hub the way you saw me do earlier, and then mount it to the spindle, weight it, and try to get about a 1/4 inch of clearance at your latch. I blended out the top and outside welds on the swing arm here, but I have not blended the back sides or the bottoms because they won't be visible, so I may as well leave myself with that bit of extra strength from keeping the weld. And I have begun making my brace piece. Basically what I did is I ran a tape measure from the top of the swing away hub to the top of this piece right here. I gave myself an extra 3 inches because I knew I would need lots of extra. I measured that angle, so I had about 30 inches. It was about 27 inches from tip to tip, but I gave myself 30. I measured the angle of that. It was about 35 degrees, so I cut a 35-degree cut up there, and you can see that it looks nice and straight. And then I also cut a 35-degree cut down here, which is reasonably straight. And then I made a complementary cut there, a 55-degree cut. And I opened up a convex opening in the top of the tube so that it would cradle onto to the hub. It's not perfect, there's a bit of a gap there, but I will fill that with weld, and it is fitting up nicely. And
Although I left myself 3 extra inches, you can see I only have to remove 1/4 of an inch there to make this work now. So I have gotten the cuts made on this brace now, and it fits reasonably well all around. It's a tiny bit high, and my angle is not perfect. If you look here, I've got just a little bigger gap at the top than I do at the bottom, so I'm just gonna take a sanding disc and take out a little bit of the bottom and none of the top, and it should fit just perfect. And then we're ready for weld up on this thing. Alrighty, so I have welded up all of the tire mounting flange and the gusset for it, and I have adjusted my brace piece just slightly so it fits very well now, and I'm ready to weld it in. But before I do, the only other welds I haven't done are of course these, because I didn't want any warpage to happen before I put my support in. Better to put the support in and then weld it so that everything gets held tight. And also these guys, and the only reason I haven't welded those is because I want to confirm that my swing arm still sits in exactly the attitude that I want it to, as I previously showed you, before I weld the sides, in case I have to cut either the top or bottom weld, which would be really a bummer. And I'm going to put this thing on now before I weld up the cross brace, and we'll make sure that everything's good. Pull it off one last time, fully weld it, and we are done with that portion.
So we'll start by welding up the spindle, and before we weld it, obviously I want to protect those bearing races, so I've dropped a steel tube over the spindle and secured that tube down using the thrust washer and nut included. And once I've got this fully welded, I'll give it a quick brushing to make sure that it is spatter free and soot free, and then I'll move over to the latch hardware and get that welded down. At this point, I'm not going to weld up the backing plate because I noticed that I had a little bit of an issue with the way that the swing arm was closing, and I think that was because my backing plate was knocked off of 90 degrees. So it's no longer sitting at a true 90 degrees, I believe. So that's why I didn't weld that yet. And then you can see me here just adjusting that little bit that I needed to do to clearance the bumper out at the side of the vehicle. And then we'll place the swing arm on the bumper and double check that backing plate and make sure that it's fitting up just right before we weld that in place. While it can be annoying fitting up a certain item over and over again, and obviously very time consuming as well, it's more annoying and more time consuming when you actually go ahead and weld something in an incorrect position and then have to cut it all apart and deal with it later. So my strongest recommendation would be to take your time and go through the fit up stage as many times as necessary to ensure that everything's fitting up just right before you actually put those final welds in. As you can see there, I adjusted the backing plate from where it was sitting, which was probably about 5 degrees off of 90, so 85 degrees or 95 degrees depending on which way you look at it, and I straightened that right back up to 90, clamped it in place where I wanted the swing arm to close, and then I welded it up fully. My subscriber count has been going up steadily and surely lately, so thank you so much for that. I'm actually nearing monetization, which is obviously very exciting for me. Once I do reach that point, I plan on putting any funds that I receive back into the channel in the form of audio-video equipment, as well as possibly some new editing software. So you can expect improved video quality, audio quality, and potentially I'll be rolling out videos a little bit quicker. So thanks again so much for all your subscriptions, your likes, and your comments. And here I'm just adding the final piece, which is the swing arm retainer. It's basically just a little ramp with a hole in it that the spring-loaded T-handle locks itself into, thereby securing the swing arm in its open position.
It is officially a wrap on the van bumper. All done, ready for powder coat. Everything has been triple tested, triple fit up, and we know everything fits just great. I have sleeved off my spindle there with a piece of tube that I always put on to protect the spindle for sandblasting and powder coat. I added this little ramp here as a stop point for the spring pin on the swing arm, so that will lock out at about 110, 120 degrees, something like that, just over 90, so that the door opens up fully the way you would want it to. Cleaned everything up, and I'm very happy with the way it's turned out. and that's the only way I send stuff out to powder coat, is when I am very happy with it. And indeed I am. I think it's turned out quite well. We added this little trailer plug kind of as a last minute thing. We've gusseted the swing arm mount spindle. We've put double shear brackets, or double shear tabs rather, on the brackets. This thing's rock solid and ready to go. And here is the swing arm for it. Today I cut out the rivet that normally holds this in and replaced it with a bolt. Reason for that is so that I can remove this portion of the handle while it goes out for sandblasting and powder coat, because of course we don't want this rubber handle sandblasted or powder coated. So we're going to remove that and put it back on once everything comes back. I've made a note for the powder coaters to mask off my wheel nut lug, or my wheel lugs rather, sorry, and also to mask off the spring pin housing, as well as the hub onto which the hub that is placed onto the spindle. Also, I've asked them to plug these holes here. One is for a grease nipple, and the other is for a set screw which holds on the aluminum cap that goes over this hub. But there you are, she's ready to go. So off to powder coat it goes. This is getting sandblasted, then it's going to get a fusion bonded primer applied to it, and then it's going to get its powder coat applied over that. So it will be a very, very long-lasting, rust-resistant finish. There's the spare wheel that's going to go on the hub there, or the flange rather, and away we go. I've drilled out the frame for the double shear tabs, and we're ready to go. So excited to get this thing off and back again and mounted and be on to another project.
All right, so there's a little quiz of the day for you. Anybody know who that was? That's my old neighbor, who is also an automotive YouTuber, only a much, much more popular one than me. That's about as much of a clue as I'll give you. Let's see if anybody can figure out in the comments who that was.
Here we go with another install of a bumper freshly back from powder coat. You can see, if you look in the light, that there's some odd looking lines across the top of the bumper, and the reason for that is those are just heat warpage from some pretty heavy duty welds that were laid in there. I'll show you the underside of that in just a second so you can get a better feel for that. And you'll also notice that the bumper is sitting on a pretty odd angle in comparison to the van, and that's simply because it is heavier on this side than the other. Reason being is there's more bracing in behind here for the swing arm than there is over here for the latch, although there is bracing. And that, as you can see, has some pretty heavy duty welds, which are what cause our little ripples in the top of the bumper there, and of course similar over here. So just so that you understand where that's coming from. And then we've got the same thing, let me catch the light here for you. We've got the same thing leading off of the receivers, and again, if we have a look, we understand why. But anyway, I'm pretty happy with the way this thing's turned out from powder coat. A couple tiny blemishes. I've got a little, I don't know, there might be a hair in the powder coat or something there, and there's one little tiny little bump there, which I am absolutely confident is not from weld spatter. So not perfect on the powder coat end, but really not bad. And then here's one other issue that we come across, is that they can only spray so deep into the receivers. And I imagine, I mean, I've never been a professional painter or powder coater, but I imagine there's not much they can do about that. I think if they tried to get a really good coat of powder coat in there, it would probably cause runs or too heavy a coat in other places, basically around the receiver. So I'm guessing they've done the best they can with that one. So overall, pretty happy with that. So let's take a minute and put this thing in place.
Another note regarding the receivers not being fully coated inside. I did spray paint them to make them look half decent once the bumper was installed, and they were fully coated with primer. They just weren't completely coated with powder coat. Since this build, I have had better luck with my powder coater fully coating the insides of the receivers with both primer and powder coat, so it's an issue that seems to have resolved itself, but in this case I used paint.
Well, there we are. Installed. At least the base is installed anyway. I'll install the swing arm tomorrow because it is way past closing time and I'm ready to go home. But you can see that it's a nice fit up. Pretty clean lines. Matches the vehicle very well, I think. Looking pretty decent.
Alright, let's go ahead and get this swing arm installed. I have, of course, pre-packed the bearings with grease, and I have added a grease seal to the bottom of the swing out hub, and now I've added the thrust washer and the nut, and I'm going to tighten that down to give just a little bit of preload to those bearings, but not too much, and we are done. Alright, so that's a wrap on another bumper here at Balmer's workshop. Done the custom bumper for the 1975 Ford Econoline 250 van. It's turned out really well. 3 receivers for the customer, 1 for towing, 2 for a giant cargo basket that we'll add later, and of course the swing out tire carrier kind of seals the deal, and then it's got the plug for towing 7-way, 5-way, or 4-way electrical. Let's open this thing up and let you have a look at it. So my standard draw latch, and the swing arm locks itself open at about 110-120 degrees, similar to my normal setup, so that the rear can be accessed fully. So customer hasn't lost any access at all with this setup, and it's a nice, slick, easy to operate system. Just lift the T handle from here, close the draw latch up, and it's as simple as that. So again, just opening up the swing arm. You can see the T-handle lifts itself up on the ramp provided and locks itself into place just nicely. So a pretty slick setup and should work well for many, many years to come. There we are, finished off with a nice high quality powder coat, and underneath that is a high quality primer. Attached in double shear fashion. You can see grade 8 hardware there, as well as underneath, and of course that carries on to the other side. Receiver is braced, swing arm pivot is braced, and finally the latch area is braced. Nice clean look. And it is time to get on to the next build. But I thank you so much for joining me for this one, and we'll see you next time at Balmer's Workshop.